And Bob Haldeman said to him, well, what am I supposed to say to him? What am I supposed to tell him? Well, you tell him, if they don't get out of that part of the investigation right now, all the Mexico stuff about the Bay of Pigs guys could all come out. And he started talking about the Bay of Pigs guys right then. And he said, well, E. Howard Hunt, if you pull that scab, there's going to be an awful lot of stuff under there that is going to cause lots of trouble. Well, that's because E. Howard Hunt was in fact part of the assassination team to kill the president. And that's exactly why Bob Haldeman, as I mentioned to you before, when he was being questioned about this by Sam Ervin and Dan Inouye, the senator from North Carolina and the senator from Hawaii, in the Watergate hearings, when he was being questioned about that, and he was asked, well, when Bob Haldeman said, what am I supposed to tell him? And Nixon said, you tell them that. You tell them that. And Sam Ervin said to him, well, what was it they were talking about? What was it they were talking about? And Bob Haldeman said, I think they were talking about the assassination of President Kennedy. And he said it just like that. And that was the moment when our country had the opportunity to follow that out, because it popped its head right to the surface like that. But everybody just stood silent for like 30 seconds and said nothing to follow up on it, and just turned around and went on to a completely different subject. So that whole nest, and what that is that what it was showing is that the American Central Intelligence Agency that had been created in 1947 at the end of World War II had in fact come to full fruition and full flower in exactly the wrong way, like people had predicted that it might. You cannot set up, these were the opponents of the creation of the CIA in 1947. You cannot create an organization like that has the authority abroad to violate laws and engage in completely illegal activity and political overthrows of governments. You can't do that because it will come home to roost. And that is exactly what happened. That's exactly what happened. That the Central Intelligence Agency became deeply involved in putting together that assassination team, at the request of Richard Nixon, who asked Howard Hughes to do it. But Howard Hughes' lawyer, Bob Mayhew, went and talked with Johnny Roselli there in Las Vegas, who was the bag man for the mafia, and asked them if they would, in fact, put together the assassination team to kill Castro so that it could keep it away from the White House, so no one would know about it. But when they did that, Trafficante was a smart guy, and he, in fact, brought guys on to run the assassination team who are now working for the Central Intelligence Agency that had fled from Cuba back in 1959 in January when Batista was overthrown. And they'd come up to Tampa and Miami and had been recruited to work in Operation 40 of the CIA under Richard Nixon to try to undermine the Cuban new revolutionary government. And so he knew perfectly well that if they got caught assassinating Fidel Castro, Raul Castro, Che Guevara, or the other 5 comandantes, then if they got caught, then the CIA would have to move in to cover for them and conceal that and keep them from being convicted, because they were associated with the CIA. And nobody would believe that it wasn't the CIA that was in charge of doing that. So that was the underlying deep sin. It was that the Central Intelligence Agency had in fact come out from under control, just like was feared. But the deeper story of that is that the Central Intelligence Agency was deeply in league with the fascists that had escaped from Europe at the end of World War II through the rat line, and had come down into Argentina and Brazil and Uruguay and Paraguay, and they were deeply involved with the Central Intelligence Agency in overthrowing the democratically elected governments in South America. And so there was a deep and abiding alliance between them, which, again, I could go on and on about that, and it's turtles all the way down. It get you all the way down to a point where what I'll do is I'll come back around to that later. But what I want to do right now is tell you what the deep story was beneath the Iran-Contra scandal that was similar to that. Because the whole explosion of the Iran-Contra scandal was rooted in a deep secret that both the Democrats and Republicans wanted to keep concealed. And the secret was this, that I told you 2 classes ago that when we filed the Iran-Contra complaint under the Federal Criminal Racketeering Act, the civil provisions of that, we filed that lawsuit on a Thursday evening of May 28th of 1986 down in Miami. And I told you that by Monday morning, I got the call from Judge James Lawrence King demanding that I come down immediately to the courtroom and be down there by 2 o'clock. I told you that story of the 26 lawyers all sitting there, and the one who was going to be representing Adolfo Calero, the head of the FDN Contras, was in fact the former CIA general counsel under George H.W. Bush, and Anthony Lapham. That was he. And that the lawyer that was going to be representing the Tamiami gun shop, that Ronald Joseph Martin Jr., that the lawyer that was representing him had been the head of the criminal division of the U.S. Attorney's Office until the previous Friday night at 5 o'clock. That demonstration of the fact that they were locking down, the national security state was going to lock down and prevent us from getting at the evidence to show what was really going on. I told you that when I came back from that meeting and came back up to my office and came into the office on Tuesday morning or Monday morning, that I'd gone to see Tip O'Neill and that I'd gone to see Claiborne Pell, and that we got the agreement set up a special select committee to investigate the charges that we were making if the Democrats were to win the election again. Same exact thing we're hearing right now. I told you that Tip O'Neill said, well, the Democrats were in charge of the House of Representatives right now, and so we could get articles of impeachment returned against Ronald Reagan and George Bush and Bill Casey and probably a dozen other high-level executives of the administration, but it won't do any good because the Republicans control the Senate now, and they would never convict them. So we're going to have to wait to see if the Democrats can take back the Senate in November, which is directly analogous to what the argument is that's being made by the Democratic Party now. No, it's not going to do any good to impeach him in the House now because the Republicans control the Senate and won't convict him. So let's wait to see if we can win the election. Same exact argument they made. And so we went along with that. But when I came back from striking that deal and coming back to the office, I told you this older man was waiting for me, who was waiting there in the office. And when I told him that I thought Theodore Shackley was the most important of all of our 26 defendants, and when he asked me, why was that, I told him it wasn't because he was the director of covert operations and was the boss of the Donald P. Gregg, who was that's getting too complicated now, I can tell. But the bottom line is that I got done with that meeting. He introduced himself, and he said, here, my name is Dick Billings. I was the chief staff writer for the House Select Committee on Assassinations. I think we can help each other out. That's where I ended the story a week ago. But I want to tell you what the key is what happened immediately after that. He said to me, look, there's a guy that wants to meet you. Would you be willing to meet with him even if you don't know who it is to start with? And I said, yes. And he said, when would you be able to meet with him? And I said, well, how about tomorrow for lunch? And he said, okay. He said, and where would you like to meet so you'll feel comfortable? I felt like Michael Corleone. They're going to take me down to Louis, where I'd feel comfortable. Anyway, so I told him, I said, let's do it at the Dubliner Cafe, right down at the bottom of Capitol Hill here. So he said, all right. So the next morning, or at lunch, 12 o'clock, I go over to the Dubliner Cafe, and here's Dick Billings waiting for me outside. I walk up and shake his hand. We walk in. And there's this like 70-year-old guy sitting in there all by himself in the Dubliner Cafe. We walk in, and Dick Billings walks me over to the guy, and he says, Dan Sheehan? He says, Joe Smith. Joe Smith, Dan Sheehan. So I shook his hand, and I said, yeah, great, Joe Smith. And he said, no. He says, I get that a lot. I get that a lot. He said, my name is Joseph Burkholder Smith. I was the deputy CIA station chief down in Mexico City back in 1973 when Theodore Shackley was taken out from being the CIA station chief in Saigon and made the head of Western Hemisphere operations for the CIA. And when he came on board as the director of Western Hemisphere operations, he removed all of the station chiefs all throughout the Western Hemisphere and put his own men in that position. He was arguing that Phil Agee was in the process of writing this book called Inside the Company, and that he might have gotten the list of who the station chiefs were, and he didn't want them compromised, so he used that as an excuse for replacing all the station chiefs with his men. And so he took out Win Scott, who was the CIA station chief, my station chief here in Mexico City, and he replaced him with a fellow by the name of Tom Polgar. And Tom Polgar came into my office as soon as he got on station, and he came in, he said, Joe, I'm not sure that I'm going to be able to keep you on as my deputy here. But there's going to be a guy who's going to come into your office tomorrow about 10 o'clock in the morning. You'll recognize who he is, he said, and he's going to ask you some questions. Now, you don't have to answer his questions, but if you do, and you answer them correctly, then that may have a lot to do with whether I'm going to keep you on as my deputy. And he might even have some other people that want to ask some questions. It's up to you. But if you want to keep your position here, you might want to go and talk to him. So the next day, he said, I'm sitting here talking to this guy. Now, here's Joseph Burkholder Smith sitting at the table with me. Dick Billings is sitting over here, and he's telling me the story. And he said, so the next morning, he said, into my office at about 10 o'clock walks Nasser Haro, who is the head of the DFS in Mexico, which is like the combined FBI and CIA. And he walks into my office and he says, Joe, I imagine that Polgar told you that I'd be coming to see you. And Joe said, well, he didn't tell me who it was, but he said that I would recognize you, and I do. And so the fellow says to him, Nasser Haro says, look, there's some people who would like to ask you some questions. And you don't have to come, you don't have to answer them, but it would really determine whether or not you're going to be left on here as the deputy to the station chief. And so Joe said, so I agreed to go with him. So we leave the office, we go downstairs, we get into one of these Suburbans with the smoke tinted windows, and we drive to the Mexico City National Airport. We go completely around all the security and get in this Learjet. And we fly away in the Learjet, and we fly this whole long ways, and we end up landing in Buenos Aires in Argentina. We get out of the Learjet, and we go all around security and get into this helicopter, and we fly all the way up to the northwestern corner of Argentina, where like 5 different countries in South America all come together there. He said, and we land in this helicopter on this like soccer field in this little town called Salta. And so I get out of the helicopter, I get out behind Nasser Haro, and I'm following Nasser Haro across this soccer field, and we walk up this big embankment, and I looked over the embankment, and he said, my God, he said, I thought I was in Bavaria. He said, and I looked down, and Nasser Haro leads me down into this little town, and he leads me over to this little Bavarian inn, and we walk in, and here are these 6 guys sitting at this big oaken table in front of a big stone fireplace, and on the mantle of the fireplace is a big, huge swastika flag. Okay, now this is 1973. He said, so the guy in the middle gestures to me to sit down. There's only one chair on the other side of the table, so I sit down. And the guy says, Joe, he said, look, we got to have a talk with you here. He said, we've put in a lot of time and effort and money into setting up a major cocaine cartel down in Medellin, in Colombia. And this cocaine is going to be being shipped up into the United States, and a portion of the profits that are generated by the sale of this cocaine are going to be used to help finance our war without boundaries against your enemies and ours. And we just wanted to make sure that if you're left on as the deputy station chief, you aren't going to do anything to interfere with that traffic. And so Joseph Burkholder Smith says to me, looks across the table, and he says, and Dan, I got to tell you, he said, I swear to God, he said, I don't know what it was I'd ever done in my whole life that would have led them to believe I would have gone along with that. And so I said, how about being the CIA deputy station chief in Mexico City for a start? I said, he looked kind of shocked like that, and he looks over to Dick Billings, and he says, gee, I thought this guy was going to cooperate with us. And Dick Billings says, hey, look, I just met the guy. He said, and so the guy gets up, Joseph Burkholder Smith gets up, walks around the table to me, sticks his hand out, grabs my hand, looks me in the eye, and he said, I just wanted to know that if you're going to be messing with Theodore Shackley, that you know exactly who it is you're really dealing with. See that look? See that puzzled look? What does that mean? What in the world does that mean? And that's what we're going to be talking about in the course. Because what you don't know is very important here. Because what was at the root of the Iran-Contra confrontation was the fact that the power that created the Central Intelligence Agency, the very men who created the Central Intelligence Agency, were the very same people that created the Third Reich in Germany, that financed the Third Reich in Germany through setting up a bank called the Union Bank of New York that was financed by the members of a particular private investment firm that I've mentioned earlier called Brown Brothers Harriman. These robber barons that had risen to power in the United States between 1868 at the end of the American Civil War and 1898, that short 30-year period, their families who had become multimillionaires, the heads of those families were all members of this private investment firm on Wall Street by the name of Brown Brothers Harriman. And they would join together and sit around the table and decide what they were going to mutually invest their money in. And what they decided to do at the end of World War I was they were going to establish because remember, at the end of World War I, the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917 had come forward and had overthrown Tsar Nicholas II and had thrown out the Tsar, had withdrawn Russia from World War I, and had created the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. And they, in fact, immediately, the United States Secretary of State at that time, a guy by the name of Robert Benning, Robert, I'll think of it in a second. Anyway, this guy who was the Secretary of State under Woodrow Wilson, he was, in fact, the son-in-law of John W. Foster. John W. Foster was the grandfather of John Foster Dulles and Allen Dulles. There's no spark of recognition in your eyes of who those people are, but the bottom line is that the United States launched, I talked to you about this, but launched a U.S. military expedition into Russia to try to crush the Bolshevik Revolution. They sent in a full armed expeditionary force to try to crush the Russian Revolution. And so that right from that start, there was this panic on the part of the capitalists and the robber barons who were in charge of the kind of imperial venture that was going on, all from the end of the American Revolution, the American Civil War, all the way up to the beginning of World War I. There was this huge period of imperial activity on the part of the United States, on the part of Britain, on the part of France, on the part of these other countries. It's the age of imperialism. This is a regular part of your textbooks of American history during this age of imperialism that led to World War I. And it was the Bolshevik Revolution that rose up and withdrew Russia from World War I and set themselves up as the antipode or the antithesis to this operation that was going on in Western civilization, of all of these major imperial powers fighting and struggling to gain access to the resources around the world for the benefit of these robber barons. Okay? And so what happened is when World War I came to an end and they tried unsuccessfully to destroy the Bolshevik Revolution, what they did is they retreated and came back home. But these men, what they did is the partners in Brown Brothers Harriman, they decided they were going to set up a thing called the Union Bank of New York, and the CEO of Brown Brothers Harriman, a man by the name of George Herbert Walker, stepped down as the CEO of Brown Brothers Harriman and had his son-in-law, Prescott Bush, become the new CEO of Brown Brothers Harriman. And George Herbert Walker went over and founded the Union Bank of New York. And he had these 50 industrialists take their monies and invest in capitalizing the Union Bank of New York. And they set up a foreign subsidiary in Holland, in the Netherlands, called the Bank of Shipping and Commerce. And there was a guy named Fritz Thyssen was the head of that bank. That bank financed the construction of the international headquarters of the Third Reich in Germany, and financed the rise of Adolf Hitler in Germany to function as the bulwark against Bolshevism in Europe. That was their purpose in creating the Third Reich. And the Third Reich began to carry through with the full same theories that these people thought were the best kind of economic theory of welding together the instrumentalities of the state with the interests of the private corporations. And that is what they were doing. The private corporations, the Krupps, the ball bearing factories, the DuPonts, the chemical corporations, etc., in the IG Farben and the others in Germany, all remained in private hands and were financed hand over fist by Brown Brothers Harriman. Brown Brothers Harriman, interestingly, the lawyer for Brown Brothers Harriman was Allen Dulles. Allen Dulles was a partner in the law firm called Sullivan and Cromwell. And Sullivan and Cromwell were the lawyers for Brown Brothers Harriman. The lawyer they assigned to be the on-the-ground lawyer for them was Allen Dulles. Allen Dulles and his brother John Foster Dulles were the grandsons of John W. Foster, who had been the Secretary of State back in 1893, that overthrew Hawaii and Guam and the Philippine Islands. They were, that age of imperialism was underway in 1893. This guy, John W. Foster, retired as soon as Allen Dulles was born, that one of his daughters married the Dulles man, okay, and had the two children, John Foster Dulles and Allen Dulles. And John W. Foster retired and began coaching these two guys, his grandsons, to understand what imperialism was all about. In fact, Allen Dulles, when he was 8 years old, wrote a major 15-page paper justifying the Boers in South Africa, in the imperial venture in South Africa. And John W. Foster was so proud of it, he had it printed up, had it printed as a book, and used to hand it out to people. So Allen Dulles and John Foster Dulles were kind of curried right from the beginning. And Robert Lansing is the guy I was trying to think of, that Robert Lansing was John W. Foster's son-in-law. That Robert Lansing married John W. Foster's oldest daughter, and he became the Secretary of State for Woodrow Wilson. So what I'm saying is this group of people were all involved in the financing of this, because what happened is at the end of World War I, when Robert Lansing sent in the Foreign Military Expeditionary Force into Russia and failed to crush the Bolshevik Revolution, came back, and what they did is they set up the Versailles Treaty Agreement for the end of World War I. And at the Versailles Treaty, negotiations, all of which were undertaken under the auspices of Robert Lansing, who was the Secretary of State for Woodrow Wilson. Woodrow Wilson had had a massive stroke and was basically incapacitated. And Robert Lansing was actually functioning as the de facto president of the United States at the end of World War I under the Wilson administration. And what he did is he brought in his two nephews, John Foster Dulles and Allen Dulles, to be the lawyers at the Versailles Treaty negotiations. And they were the guys who actually drafted the reparations portions of the Treaty of Versailles. Yes.
Well, isn't it like these reparations are kind of like what tanked the German economy? They kind of led to the conditions for the creation of Nazi Party.
No. What actually these reparations are what allowed Brown Brothers Harriman to loan the money to Germany to rebuild their massive industries and their military to become the bulwark against Bolshevism. They weren't interested in trying to build democratic institutions. What they were interested in is building a huge, powerful military organization to protect Europe against Bolshevism, asserting that they were attempting to poison all of Europe with the ideas of socialism. And so what happened is that John Foster Dulles and Allen Dulles not only were there at the Treaty of Versailles writing up the reparations provisions, but once they got the reparations provisions put in, Allen Dulles was made the lawyer for Germany. And he negotiated the loan agreements so that Brown Brothers Harriman, the capitalists at Brown Brothers Harriman, loaned the money to Germany to rebuild all of their military industry. And they, through the Union Bank of New York, financed the rise of the Nazi Party and built the big headquarters for the Nazi Party. And so what they were doing is coordinating the building of the Third Reich to function as the bulwark against Bolshevism in Europe. And that's what actually happened. And so when you go through the entire, you go through World War II against the Nazis, and what happened is that this was exposed, actually. It exposed that these guys were financing the Third Reich. And there was a whole set of congressional hearings, and they sealed those hearings, and they insisted that they were owning stock in all the German companies, the Krupp ball bearing factories, the IG Farben, and all those. The stocks were being held by the members of Brown Brothers Harriman. And so they were ordered to turn loose of those stocks because of the war, because they were trading with the enemy. And so what they did is they put them into an escrow account, and they hired to represent them Allen Dulles, who in fact put those things in a trust so they didn't have to give up those stocks. But all of that's just part of history. And when Roosevelt came in, Franklin Roosevelt had come in early in 1932 to 1934 and was trying to keep trying to stop the results of the Depression. These people actually choreographed an attempted military coup against Roosevelt. And these are things that you're never going to find out about if you didn't take this course. That from 1932 to 1934, there was a major attempted military coup against the United States government of Franklin Roosevelt, engineered by the partners of Brown Brothers Harriman. And the military general that they attempted to run that coup for them, General Butler, who was the commandant of the United States Marine Corps, went to Congress and told them about it. And they had a whole set of closed-door hearings in which he testified, and they sealed all the transcripts of it. And what they did is told the guys to just cut it out. Stop that. You got to stop that. We're not going to do anything to you because it would really humiliate everybody, and it would embarrass everybody, and the people in the United States wouldn't know what to think about it. And so that you just stop doing that, and we'll let you go. And that's what they did. And so that this whole group of men at the end of World War II, what they did is they had been deeply involved in maintaining the Third Reich. And what they did is they all, not all, but a lot of them participated in sneaking the leadership of the Third Reich out of Europe at the end of World War II and snuck them into South America. They're in Argentina and Brazil and Uruguay and Paraguay. and they set themselves up down there in exile. And these same people worked to set up the Central Intelligence Agency. And the Central Intelligence Agency got set up to be a covert operations group that would, in fact, confront communism and socialism around the world. But what they were really doing is they were promoting and promulgating the issues of capitalism and state capitalism. Capitalism that was, in fact, the same kind of partnership between the instrumentalities of the state and the major corporations. This is the issue that we're dealing with in the United States. This is the element that created the Central Intelligence Agency, and this is the intelligence agency that got out of control, basically, and brought back home the same kind of tactics that they were authorized to use against other countries around the world to keep them from becoming socialists. And they are operational here in the United States right now. Okay, so that's why there's a deep secret here that you're not allowed to know about. And this is all this dynamic that's going on between this element and the element that is trying to establish constitutional principles, restriction of their power, the more equitable distribution of resources, not only in our country but in the world. There's this fundamental conflict going on between these two groups, and that's what you see underlying here. In the progressive elements in the Democratic Party, the new Justice Democrats, represent the Madisonians to try to push these people back. Yes?
When you say like the CIA is kind of like out of control and operating within kind of the bounds of our country, was that then, or do you still like think that's happening now?
There isn't any reason why they would have stopped. That they, as I said, in 1980, they're the ones that brought in the money to knock off Frank Church, who headed the Church Committee that investigated their abuses, and knocked off Dick Clark of Iowa, knocked off Birch Bayh in Indiana, and tried to get Alan Cranston in California, and tried to get George McGovern in South Dakota. They had 5 of them targeted, but they brought in millions and millions of dollars of money that had been skimmed off the drug trade in the Southeast Asia to try to overthrow them. Now, I know this is an awful lot to absorb, and so what we want to do is when we get together on Thursday, I want to just sort of settle all of this stuff for you, so that we can then turn our attention to what the potential relationship is between the global climate change crisis that we're confronting and the real potential for getting Trump successfully impeached. And we can't hinge it all simply on whether or not we can prove that Trump and Putin are partners in this intertrust group, this secret group that we don't know who was in it yet. That is a great potential to look at, and we're in the process of looking at that now in our office to figure out who that is, and we will let you know as soon as we know whether or not this is they. But we have to try to figure out what we can do as American citizens to overcome this, but we need to understand that it's not something that has happened just under Trump. And it's not something that's just happened under the Bushes. It's not something that just happened, since Ronald Reagan. This is a fundamental underlying dynamic in the American body politic. This element, these financiers and industrialists and mercantilists are trying to control and run the government because they do not trust the basic people, okay? And the fact of the matter is, it's an open question as to whether or not we, as the regular people, have the capacity to govern ourselves and directly in the face of this information. Because if we can peel away the secrecy and reveal it to our people, we still have to mobilize and do something about it. And that's what the purpose of this course is about. Okay? So I don't want to keep you any longer, but I appreciate your time, and I'll see you on Thursday. Okay?
Welcome back to New World Next Week. I'm James Corbett of CorbettReport.com.
And I'm James Evan Pilato from MediaMonarchy.com. Creepy Uncle Joe has a Ukraine problem. We got that story, plus chilling kill lists. But first, silencing the whistle. The Intercept shutters Snowden archive, citing costs. On March 13th, a report in the Daily Beast revealed that the New York-based outlet The Intercept would be shutting down its archive of the trove of government documents entrusted to a handful of journalists, including Intercept co-founders Glenn Greenwald and Laura Poitras, by whistleblower Edward Snowden. However, that account did not include the role of Greenwald as well as Jeremy Scahill, another Intercept co-founder, in the controversial decision to shutter this Snowden archive, according to a timeline of events by Poitras that was shared and published by journalist and former Intercept columnist Barrett Brown. Both Scahill and Greenwald were intimately involved in the decision to close the Snowden archive, while other outlets, such as the Jeff Bezos-owned Washington Post and the New York Times, also possess much, though not all, of the archive. The Intercept was the only outlet with the full archive that had been continued to publishing, continue to publish the documents at a very slow pace in the last recent years. In total, fewer than 10% of the Snowden documents have been published since 2013. Thus, the closing of the publication's Snowden archive will likely mean the end of any future publications unless Greenwald's promise of finding the right partner that has the funds to robustly publish is fulfilled. Notably, Edward Snowden, who was, if you don't recall, granted asylum in Russia after going public as a whistleblower, had not been consulted by Greenwald or Reed over what, according to Laura Poitras said, was their decision to shut down the Snowden documents. Snowden was subsequently informed of the decision by Poitras on March 14th, and by that point, when this article was published, had yet to publicly comment on the closure. And this comes from Mint Press News, silencing the whistle. James, do we know, has old CIA Snowden said anything in the 2 weeks since this?
I haven't seen it. But if anybody has that, I'd be interested to see it. But I mean, come on, this is the inevitable conclusion to the Edward Snowjob and Daddy Greenbacks story. We knew it was going to end this way, and we've been talking about it essentially since the story broke. And people might remember and cast their mind back a couple of years when people, I think John Young did the calculation, like at this rate, if they keep releasing Snowden documents at the rate they're releasing them, it'll only take 191 years to release them all, or whatever it was. Well, it'll never happen. It will never happen, because exactly as we talked about at the time, Pierre Omidyar swooped in to buy up the Snowden archive and then put it under wraps. Mission accomplished for everyone. The CIA PSYOP job of putting their CIA agent into Booz Allen Hamilton to be the savior who swoops out with these documents that they'll publish a few to get everyone scared and then keep them, the juicy ones, under wraps, the ones that have to do with Pierre Omidyar's business interests. Funny how they never reported on that. Again, this is all just exactly what we talked about at the time. And of course, the idea that this is being done because of budget restraints. So we just, with our $250 million seed funding from Pierre Omidyar, we just can't afford to publish these documents. We can't afford to hit that button and put them up on our website. No, that's way too much work for us. Complete nonsense. They're cutting back 4% of their workforce. And the research department, which was in charge of handling this archive, supposedly, is 1.5% of the budget. So no, they couldn't cut back on Glenn Greenwald's $500,000 a year salary. No. They couldn't cut back on Scahill, who I think the last reported salary he was making was upwards of $385,000 a year or something like that, for writing 4 articles in a year or something like that. It's ridiculous. And in 1 year, Scahill was making something like $50,000 per article for The Intercept. It's nonsense. This is a total garbage nonsense atrocity of journalism. This is exactly what you would expect when a billionaire swoops in to buy up a sensitive intelligence archive. But again, we've talked about it before. This is the inevitable conclusion of this story, and I really hope people will go into the nuts and bolts and meat and potato and get into the links in this particular article that we're linking to, because it's just a rabbit hole, and there's so many different pieces to the story, some of which I'd even forgotten. Remember when The Intercept burned Reality Winner? She's in jail now because of The Intercept. Or remember Perhaps apropos to nothing, but one of the former Intercept employees turned out to be a guy who was phoning in phony bomb threats and hoaxes to Jewish community centers, and just, I mean, it's just nonsense on top of nonsense, but at the core is Greenbacks and Snowjob. And it's, as I say, this is exactly what we would have expected. So please do dig into this story, everyone out there, because this is exactly how it's done. And Greenwald is sitting there shaking a finger at Maddow for her $10 million a year and her Russiagate nonsense. Well, your Snowjob nonsense and $500,000 a year for your gated community there in Rio de Janeiro. I hope you sleep well at night, Glenn, knowing what you've done in massacring this archive.
I was going to mention maybe they could ask Rachel Maddow for some of her multiple millions, or even maybe Bezos will swoop in, right? We'll include in the show notes that Reality Winner was a cover story episode of New World next week when that story was breaking. And I think an easy way to put this into context for people to think about, like, storage online. Think about how excited we've gone in the last 15 years or so when you started out with, I think I even have, what is this? 256 megabytes, baby. That's how much I used to fit on this old thumb drive. How much do you fit now? What is 64 gigs on one that's plugged in? It's the same thing with internet storage space. So yeah, the idea that I can't cough up the hosting bucks to keep this going is pretty laughable on its face. And that's how we get kicked off here on episode 370 of New World next week. And we'll continue, I think, along this line of questioning, if you will. James, U.S. refusal to confirm or deny it put American journalist on drone kill list called chilling. We grabbed this from Common Dreams, which will also reference some of their own previous journalism as well. Again, everything we say always included in your show notes. Lawyers for an American journalist who believes he was placed on the government's infamous kill list warned last Tuesday that the rights of all U.S. citizens are at stake if the country's drone assassination program is allowed to continue. The organization's comments came as part of a response to the U.S. government's attempt to dismiss a lawsuit regarding its use of the drone kill list. Reprieve is the place that's representing Bilal Abdul Karim, a journalist and U.S. citizen who claims he was repeatedly targeted and nearly killed 5 separate times by drone and missile attacks in 2016 when he was reporting on the ongoing conflict in Syria. Karim joined an Al Jazeera journalist in 2017 in an ongoing lawsuit against the government, demanding that the Trump administration remove their names from the kill list of potential targets for the U.S. drone program. If the government manages to have the lawsuit dismissed, legal experts warn it would allow America's next top president and any future presidents to secretly place any American on a kill list without telling them why, therefore stripping them of their constitutional right to due process, which has pretty much been well and destroyed these last nearly 18 years, at least. Karim believes the Obama administration placed him on the kill list and wants Trump to remove his name, asserting that his inclusion is the result of arbitrary and capricious agency action accomplished without due process and in violation of the United States Constitution and U.S. international law. Now, one good story deserves another, and I can give you a related one to this. In other democracy dies in darkness news, U.S. spies helped UAE hack phones of Al Jazeera chairman, BBC host, and other journalists. Former U.S. intelligence hackers helped the United Arab Emirates spy on Al Jazeera's chairman, also a BBC host, and other media figures as part of a secret Emirati intelligence program called Project Raven. This is all during the blockade on Qatar. At least 9 former NSA agents, you know, the ones at war with CIA Snowden agents, 9 former NSA agents and U.S. military operatives worked within Project Raven, which was exposed in January after spying on U.S. journalists and a British activist, along with dissidents and opponents of the UAE royal family. Project Raven, set up in 2009 with the assistance of former George W. Bush White House officials who Barack Obama kept on in his cabinet and administration, and U.S. intelligence contractors originally meant to track terrorism but soon evolved into spying on opponents. Bush, Obama, Trump, lather, rinse, repeat. James?
Yeah, I'm thoroughly confused here because it was my understanding that all of this disposition matrix presidential kill list by any other name, all that nonsense was going out the door, because if you vote for Trump, that's a vote to drain the swamp and make America great again. Of course he's going to get rid of these unconstitutional presidential kill lists and all of that. That's what a vote for Trump means, right? And I'm further confused because I'm pretty sure that Obama Hope and Change was all about, we're going to change, and it's not going to be like that horrible Bush era. That's a horrible dark legacy in American history, but we're changing a new face for a new generation, and here we go. And he was the one who actually instituted this presidential kill list. So I don't get it. I don't understand. It seems like if you vote for the left critter or the right critter, you get the same thing every single time. Well, don't worry about that. Just vote someone different next time. Vote harder, and it will all be solved. No, of course not. This is total nonsense, and it just goes to show that, yes, this has nothing to do with left-right Coke Pepsi politics. Nothing whatsoever. It is about the oligarchy ruling over you. And their ability to do anything, absolutely anything. No due process, put you on a secret list, not tell you you're on the list, not tell you why you're on the list, not give you any opportunity to dispute your place on the list, not even allowing it to be heard in court, because if you hear it in court, why we think you should be killed, well, then that would jeopardize national security, right? That is literally the argument they're using, which is just straight out of Kafka, but here it is in real life, and what are you going to do about it, I guess, is the question. And as the non-American in the room, might I just also point out that, of course, once again, this all revolves around the idea, well, yeah, I mean, it's an American on this presidential kill list with no due process, no warning, no explanation, no ability to in any way challenge it. I mean, if it was one of those filthy foreigners, that would be fine. But it's an American that you're stripping these basic fundamental human rights, asterisk, only for Americans, from. So that's a horrible thing. You know, I mean, who cares about, weddings in Pakistan or whatever? Drone the hell out of them. It doesn't matter. But, a secret American being targeted, that's an altogether different story.
That's, I mean, doing what we've been doing now for this amount of time, we've seen it flip back and forth now enough times that we've seen both sides have their turn at the table, and the same agenda keeps just rolling forward. Speaking of some of the same folks that are always on this grand chessboard pushing things forward, I think it's a positive thing. I've made reference, James, on some of our recent New World Next Weeks, how the Pepsi side of the America's Next Top President 2020 season is already filling up with all kinds of candidates. And I think it's just been already kind of wildly entertaining to watch the fake left destroy each other. And it's, I think, only just getting going, because I don't think creepy Uncle Joe Biden is going to do real well in the 2020 campaign, maybe not the least of which because he's a creepy, touchy-feely kind of guy, as we've reported for you before, and I'll remind you about again after the main story. Forget creepy. Biden has a major Ukraine problem. Joe Biden appears to have made a major tactical error last year when he bragged to an audience of foreign policy experts on video how he threatened to hurl Ukraine into bankruptcy if their top prosecutor, General Viktor Shokin, wasn't immediately fired. In his own words, with video cameras rolling, Biden described how he threatened Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko in March 2016 that the Obama administration would pull $1 billion in U.S. loan guarantees, sending the former Soviet republic towards insolvency if it didn't immediately fire prosecutor General Viktor Shokin. I said, you're not getting the billion. I'm going to be leaving here in, I think it was 6 hours. I looked at them and said, I'm leaving in 6 hours. If the prosecutor is not fired, you're not getting your money, bragged Biden, recalling the conversation with Poroshenko. Well, son of a bitch, he got fired. And they put in place someone who was solid at the time. Those are all quotes from creepy Uncle Joe Biden. You can watch the video for yourself. He was talking at the Council on Foreign Relations event while insisting that former President Obama was, of course, involved and complicit in the threat. So the question that Zero Hedge asks, why would Biden want the SOB fired? In what must be an amazing coincidence, the prosecutor was leading a wide-ranging corruption investigation into a natural gas firm of which Biden's son, Hunter, sat on the board of directors. Obama named Biden the administration's point man on Ukraine in February 2014 after a popular revolution ousted Russia-friendly President Viktor Yanukovych, and as Moscow sent military forces into Ukraine's Crimea territory. James, do you want the creepy Uncle Joe updates related to his inappropriate touching now or later?
We'll get into that in a moment, but we should once again direct people to the article that we're talking about here, and we're linking to Zero Hedge, but I think people should click back through to The Hill, which is where this story comes from, and basically Zero Hedge just plagiarized that article. It's got all the background that you need on this story in case you missed it at the time. Yes, Vice President Biden's younger son, not the older one that we all know about who died and it was all tragic, but the younger son, the one who got kicked out of the U.S. Navy Reserve for cocaine and ended up on the board of this Burisma Energy in the Ukraine, just as Biden was being appointed as the Obama administration's point man in Ukraine and was receiving $160,000 a month, I think it was, into his American bank account, and what was going on. And they opened up a corruption investigation into Hunter Biden and Burisma Energy, and the prosecutor in this Hill article talks about, we were opening the investigation, we were going to be talking to the board members, including Hunter, and then I got fired by Biden, who's on the phone saying we'll withhold $1 billion. And yeah, as you point out, the foreign policy experts that he was bragging to were his string pullers at the CFR, of course. Hey guys, look at what a great job I did here. Oh wait, this is being recorded? I mean, yeah, Joe Biden is just such an... I mean, the most charitable thing you could say is he's just a daughterly old man who doesn't even understand what's happening half the time. So maybe that's... At any rate, I'm sure that as you're about to get into the audacity of grope, as the Daily Show called it, is going to be the thing that will sink his presidential bid more so than the Ukraine scandal, because as we all know, the American public doesn't really care about complicated, he was corruption, probe something, prosecutor, billion, whatever, that's too complicated. Oh, he's groping women on camera. Well, okay, either way, as long as he goes down, I guess it's good to get another one of these scoundrels out of office. But this story is actually important. I hope people will check into the article.
It's a lot of the young tigers knocking the old ones out of the tree and trying to assert their new supremacy as Congress critters. Well, and also you're talking about kind of the doddering old folks like Dianne Feinstein, who pretty much immediately kind of admitted, did you know people can tape something and put it on the internet and you'll be famous? I didn't know that could happen. Well, she found out that it could happen. So the updates on Creepy Uncle Joe, which we have talked about before, actually, in your Media Monarchy and New World Next Week archives. Biden accused by 2 more women of inappropriate touching. And what does he do? I guess he likes to do things on video, James. This is such an important story. Joe Biden taped a video on Twitter today to say he's going to be more respectful of people's personal space. And we will remind you of, I know you can't really make that up, our November 16th, 2017 New World Next Week episode, Creepy Joe Biden and Lady Gag Gag.
Yeah. Before people, I hope people don't think I was dismissing all of that earlier when I said that the Ukraine story is also important. Absolutely. The groping is disgusting, is despicable, especially with the young girls, 12-year-old girls and things that he's literally groping on camera. It is sickening. This man should not be anywhere near office for a number of reasons. I just don't want people to think I was making light of that earlier.
Well, AOC says that it's okay, so it's not a big deal because you can selectively enforce, which Me Too thing they're going to go after. Apparently, it was our New World Next Week episode back in November of 2017. We'll include the links to that, just like we include the links to everything. James, I always like to remind people at the end of these episodes, I stream news, music, memes, and more Monday through Friday, 9 to 5 Mountain Time at MediaMonarchy.com/listen. James.
All right, excellent. Well, we're looking forward to 3 more stories next week. James, thanks.
Thanks, buddy. Take care.
On November 8, 2016, Vladimir Putin won the U.S. presidential election by getting his Manchurian candidate, Donald Trumpsky, into the White House as the crowning achievement of a decades-long plan to use P-tape compromat and real estate deals that never happened to get a reality TV star installed in the Oval Office. 12D chess master Putin then used that mind control puppet to increase sanctions on Russia, expel dozens of Russian diplomats, sell arms to Ukraine, withdraw from the INF Treaty, build up NATO troops on the Russian border, stage a coup in Venezuela, and generally make life worse for Russia as part of his grand scheme to enable the rise of a new Russian empire. Mind controlling the US public with hundreds of dollars of Facebook Jesus memes, this modern day czar carefully rigged the election by not hacking into any voting systems and by not hacking into the DNC servers, revealing that the DNC had rigged the election against $27 and in favor of.
Why aren't I 50 points ahead, you might ask?
Luckily, the valiant US media was all over the case.
Donald Trump has been a Russian intelligence asset since 1987.
The intelligence agencies knew what to do.
You take on the intelligence community, they have 6 ways from Sunday at getting back at you.
And St. Mueller was on the job, commanding an army of 40 agents, 2,800 subpoenas, 500 search warrants, 500 witnesses, 230 communication records, and a partridge in a pear tree, so we all knew that
the walls
are increasingly
closing in on him.
Tonight, the walls
are closing in.
the media admitted that the story was
mostly bullshit right now.
But that's okay, because we're living in a post-truth world and democracy dies in darkness. The intelligence agencies admitted that they
Mess around other people's elections, Jim?
But that's okay, because it's
Only for a very good cause.
You do that?
the resistance spent years supporting disgraced attorneys, deranged liars, and anyone else who would support their narrative. But that's okay, because votes only count when your candidate wins. And after 2 years of investigation, Mueller delivered a report that brought some
troubling news. Our president is not a Russian asset.
And that's fascinating. Because everybody would like to hear that from Robert Mueller as well as from Bill Barr. But at this point, it's only Bill Barr.
But that's okay, because everyone knows Trump is a Russian agent anyway, so who needs that stupid Mueller guy? And now President Putin and his orange Cheeto puppet are laughing all the way to the brink of nuclear war in the Cold War 2.0, cheered on by the neo-neocons and their neolib friends and made possible by a neo-McCarthyist purge of dissenting voices. This is the official story of Russiagate, as brought to you by the MSM that delivered the hard truths on
Baghdad has failed to disarm its weapons of mass destruction.
And
rape that's being assisted, he said, by the distribution of Viagra.
And
what if it was something fully that we don't really understand? A lot of people have been asking about that, about black holes.
if you doubt any part of this story, you are a no-good, dirty, treasonous alt-right Russian bot troll who deserves to be censored from the internet forever. If you love truth, sunshine, ice cream, rainbows, kitty cats, and the 4th of July, then you will never question any part of this story. Ever. This message has been brought to you by the Friends of the DNC, MSNBS, the Rachel Maddow Retirement Fund, Clinton for 2020, and the CIA. And remember, ignorance is strength.